The road was little more than a strip of churned mud cutting through the hedgerows of eastern France. It was dawn, September 19th, 1944, near the farming village of Arracourt. A low mist clung to the fields so tightly that tanks appeared only as dark shapes a few seconds before they were on top of you. Somewhere inside that gray wall, an American M4A3 Sherman, armed with the new 76mm gun, pushed forward, its engine growling steadily, its crew alert but confident.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
They had heard the rumors. German Panther tanks were in the area, fast, heavily armored, and armed with one of the most dangerous tank guns of the war. But rumors did not always become reality. This morning, they were about to. Inside the Sherman, the air was cramped and hot despite the cold outside. The smell of oil, cordite, and sweat filled every corner of the turret. Yet the commander, Staff Sergeant Robert Miller, leaned over his cupola, peering through the mist. His gunner, Corporal James Turner, kept one eye fixed to the telescopic sight. The loader crouched beside racks of 76mm ammunition, his gloved hands ready. The driver gripped the controls, feeling every bump in the muddy ground. The radio crackled with short reports from nearby tanks, but most of what they saw was fog. You can almost feel the tension inside that Sherman. Every crewman knew that visibility was poor. Every crewman knew that if a Panther was waiting ahead, the first shot would likely decide everything. Just weeks earlier, American armored forces had raced across France after the breakout from Normandy. The destruction of much of the German 7th Army in the Falaise Pocket had opened the road east. General George S. Patton's Third Army advanced with astonishing speed. Town after town fell. Fuel shortages slowed operations, but morale remained high. Many American tank crews believed the war might be over before Christmas. Then the Germans began to strike back. By mid-September, Adolf Hitler had ordered a new armored offensive in Lorraine. The German 5th Panzer Army, under General Hasso von Manteuffel, assembled powerful formations, including the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades. These units were equipped with brand-new Panther Ausf G tanks. To many German officers, the Panther represented the ideal balance of firepower, armor, and mobility. Its long-barreled 75mm KWK-42L/70 gun could destroy most Allied tanks at well over 1,500 meters. Its sloped frontal armor was difficult to penetrate. If used correctly, it was a deadly machine. Yet the Americans facing this threat were part of the 4th Armored Division, commanded by Major General John S. Wood. His units were experienced and aggressive. Among them, the 37th Tank Battalion operated M4A3 Shermans, many fitted with the more powerful 76mm M1 gun. This weapon was a major improvement over the earlier 75mm gun, offering better armor penetration. Still, American crews understood its limits. Against the thick frontal armor of a Panther, success often required close range, careful shot placement, or a flank attack. That morning, the mist over Arracourt changed the rules for both sides. At around 7 a.m., German armored columns moved forward through the fog, hoping to surprise the Americans. Panther tanks advanced in groups, supported by Panzer Grenadiers and reconnaissance vehicles, and their commanders expected to overwhelm scattered U.S. units before American artillery and air power could respond. What they did not know was that American tank crews were already probing ahead. Staff Sergeant Miller's Sherman crested a slight rise. Through the cupola vision blocks, he saw only a few rows of damp corn stalks and a line of trees beyond. Then he heard something, a deep mechanical rumble, heavier than a Sherman engine. "Tank movement ahead," he reported over the intercom. Turner adjusted the gun slightly to the left. The Sherman rolled forward another 20 meters, and then, through the fog, a shape emerged. Low, wide, angular. The sharply sloped glacis and long gun barrel were unmistakable. Panther. For one suspended moment, both crews saw each other. But the Panther commander reacted first. Inside the German tank, Oberleutnant Hans Becker had been scanning through his TZF-12A sight. The fog reduced visibility to perhaps 200 meters. At that distance, the Panther's gun was devastating. Becker instantly recognized the American Sherman and gave the order to fire. The Panther's 75-millimeter gun roared. The recoil slammed backward. The armor-piercing shell crossed the short distance in a fraction of a second. It struck the Sherman high on the front hull. The impact sounded like a giant hammer hitting steel. Inside Miller's tank, sparks exploded across the fighting compartment. Fragments tore through wiring and instrument panels. The driver was thrown against his controls. Smoke began pouring into the hull. For one terrifying second, nobody knew whether the tank was still alive. The Sherman lurched, but kept moving. The shell had penetrated, but not cleanly enough to ignite the ammunition. Miller shouted for immediate return fire. Turner already had the Panther centered in his sight. The loader rammed an armor-piercing round into the breech. "Up!" Turner fired. The 76-millimeter gun cracked, filling the turret with blast and smoke. The shell hit the Panther's glacis and ricocheted away. No penetration. The Panther remained motionless, its gun still aimed directly at them. Miller knew they had only seconds. He ordered the driver to turn sharply right and seek cover behind a hedgerow. As the Sherman pivoted, the Panther fired again. This round struck the left track assembly, blasting steel and mud into the air. The Sherman shuddered violently and came to a stop. One track hung loose. They were immobilized. And now the crew faced every tanker's nightmare, a crippled tank in full view of an enemy Panther. Miller radioed their position. Nearby American tanks and tank destroyers were listening. Turner loaded another round and aimed carefully, this time at the Panther's gun mantlet. He fired. The shell struck near the turret front, showering sparks but causing no obvious damage. The Panther began reversing into the fog, using the terrain to break contact. It disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. For several seconds, there was only silence. Smoke drifted inside the Sherman. The driver groaned, but was alive. The bow gunner reported that the hull was still holding. Miller wiped soot from his face and looked through the cupola again. The Panther was gone. The encounter had lasted less than a minute. But in that minute, every lesson of armored warfare had become painfully clear. The Panther had seen first and fired first. That alone nearly destroyed the Sherman. The American crew survived because of luck, discipline, and the Sherman's ability to keep functioning after severe damage. Around them, the larger battle was only beginning. Across the Arakort sector, dozens of German tanks were moving through the fog. Small groups of Shermans, M18 Hellcats, and infantry anti-tank teams fought scattered engagements. American artillery observers, often perched in exposed positions, called down barrages on roads and assembly areas. Radios became as important as guns. One of the greatest strengths of American armored doctrine was communication. Every Sherman carried reliable radio equipment. Commanders coordinated rapidly, sharing enemy sightings and adjusting movements. German crews, though highly skilled, often struggled with fragmented attacks and poor visibility. Later that morning, Captain Abramowitz of the 37th Tank Battalion maneuvered his company into a concealed position near Les. As Panthers emerged from the fog, American tanks opened fire from the flanks. Several German tanks were hit before they could react. At the same time, M18 Hellcats from the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion used their speed to strike and relocate. Their 76mm guns were identical in caliber to the Shermans, but their thin armor meant survival depended on hitting first and avoiding return fire. For American crews, the fog was both danger and protection. The Panther's superior gun mattered less when targets appeared suddenly at close range. And the Sherman's faster turret traverse, good optics, and stabilized gun gave crews a better chance to react quickly during short-range encounters. Still, no one underestimated the Panther. The Panther Ausf G was a formidable design. Introduced in 1944, it featured improved hull construction and a revised driver's plate. Weighing nearly 45 tons, it was powered by a Maybach HL230 V12 engine, producing around 700 horsepower. On paper, it combined speed with lethal firepower. Yet the Panther had weaknesses. Final drives were prone to failure. Fuel consumption was high. The large vehicle was difficult to recover if damaged. In muddy fields and narrow roads, its size became a liability. The Sherman M4A3 was different in philosophy. It was simpler, more reliable, and easier to maintain. The Ford GAA V8 engine gave good performance, as spare parts were widely available. Crews trusted the tank because it usually started, moved, and kept fighting. By noon, the battlefield around Arracourt was scattered with burning vehicles. German attacks continued, but American resistance stiffened. Artillery pounded assembly areas. Whenever the weather cleared, fighter bombers from the 19th Tactical Air Command attacked roads and columns. Staff Sergeant Miller and his crew were eventually reached by a recovery team under intermittent shell fire. Their damaged Sherman was towed behind cover. The penetration hole in the front hull and the shattered track told the story of how close they had come to death. Miller stood beside the tank, his uniform blackened with soot. He watched other Shermans move forward into the mist. The battle was far from over. In the days that followed, the Battle of Arracourt became one of the largest armored clashes ever fought by U.S. forces on the Western Front. Between September 18th and September 29th, 1944, American units of the 4th Armored Division and supporting formations defeated repeated German counterattacks. The Germans committed more than 200 tanks and assault guns. They expected to regain momentum. Instead, they suffered severe losses. Several factors decided the outcome. American crews were highly adaptable. Their commanders used terrain skillfully. Artillery support was fast and accurate. Radios allowed rapid coordination. And the Germans, despite fielding powerful tanks like the Panther, often attacked piecemeal in poor conditions. This did not mean the Sherman was superior in a direct duel. At long range, the Panther held a clear advantage. Its gun penetrated the Sherman with ease, and its frontal armor resisted many Allied rounds. But battles are not fought on paper. They are fought in fog, mud, confusion, and fear. They are fought by exhausted men making split-second decisions. Staff Sergeant Miller's encounter captured that truth perfectly. The Panther struck first, the Sherman survived, and survival was often enough to change the battle. As September turned to October, mechanics repaired Miller's tank. Damaged plates were replaced, new track sections were installed. The crew returned to action with the same machine that had nearly become their coffin. For tankers, this was normal. They learned to trust each other more than the armor around them. The commander depended on the gunner depended on the loader, the driver depended on everyone. Inside a tank, the 5 men lived and died as one. Miller's crew had drilled constantly. Loading times were measured in seconds. Commands were brief and precise. In combat, that training became instinct. When the Panther appeared, nobody panicked. That discipline saved them. German crews were equally professional. Many Panther commanders were veterans of the Eastern Front, where tank battles around Kursk and Ukraine had hardened them. They respected American artillery and aircraft, but often believed their own tanks could dominate any direct engagement. Technically, they were often right. Operationally, the story was more complicated. A Panther that broke down before reaching the battlefield was useless. A Panther trapped in mud was vulnerable. A Panther isolated without infantry support could be flanked. At Arracourt, those problems multiplied. General John S. Wood later emphasized that aggressive leadership and quick movement were crucial. Rather than waiting passively, his units maneuvered constantly, forcing German commanders to react. This denied the Panthers the ideal long-range engagements where they excelled. The 76mm Sherman represented the American effort to close the firepower gap. Armor-piercing rounds such as the M62 APC and later HVAP ammunition improved penetration, though HVAP remained scarce in 1944. Against the Panther's side armor, the 76mm gun was highly effective. Crews were taught to aim for the turret sides, hull flanks, and weaker lower plates whenever possible. The battle also highlighted the importance of combined arms. Shermans did not fight alone. Infantry cleared anti-tank teams from hedgerows. Artillery disrupted enemy concentrations. Reconnaissance units reported movements. Engineers repaired roads and bridges. Air support attacked supply routes. Together, these elements gave the Americans a decisive edge. For the men inside the tanks, however, war still came down to moments. The sound of a shell hitting armor, the smell of burning insulation, the brief glance of an enemy silhouette through fog, the decision to fire half a second faster. You can almost imagine Miller lying awake that night after the first encounter. The clang of the Panther's shell replayed in his mind, the sparks, the smoke, the realization that 1 inch in a different direction might have ignited the ammunition and killed them all. Yet by morning, he and his crew climbed back into steel once again. That was the reality of armored warfare. Fear did not disappear. And men simply learned to function despite it. The Battle of Arakort remains one of the clearest examples of how training, leadership, and coordination can overcome technical disadvantages. Historians often compare tank specifications, but Arakort reminds us that numbers on paper tell only part of the story. The Panther was among the most dangerous tanks of World War II. The Sherman was often underestimated. But in the fields of Lorraine, it was the American crews who adapted faster and fought more effectively as a team. German losses were heavy. Estimates vary, but dozens of Panthers and other armored vehicles were destroyed or abandoned. The offensive failed to halt Patton's advance. For the soldiers involved, victory came at a cost. Tanks burned on both sides. Crews were killed, wounded, and or trapped inside vehicles they had trusted with their lives. Each wreck in the fields marked a few violent seconds of combat. A gunner who spotted first, a commander who hesitated, a loader who worked under unbearable pressure, a driver who turned at exactly the right moment. Staff Sergeant Miller's Sherman eventually rolled east again. Its scars remained beneath fresh paint. To outsiders, it was just another tank among thousands produced by American factories. To its crew, it was proof that survival sometimes depended on inches, training, and luck. Years later, veterans remembered not only the machines but the sensations, the constant vibration of the engine, the bruises from recoil, the metallic taste of smoke, the terror of waiting for the next shot, and above all, the bond between crewmen who trusted one another completely. The duel between the M4A3 Sherman 76mm and the Panther Ausf G has become one of the defining images of armored warfare in Europe. One tank was technically superior in many respects. The other was reliable, numerous, and operated within a highly effective combined arms system. At Arakort, that system prevailed. Still, on the morning of September 19, 1944, none of that larger history mattered to the men inside Miller's tank. What mattered was the dark shape emerging from the fog. What mattered was the flash of the Panther's gun. What mattered was whether the next shell would be the last. The Sherman pushed forward. The Panther struck first, and for one breathless minute, in the mist of Lorraine, 5 American tankers discovered how thin the line between life and death could be. Their tank did not burn. Their crew did not break. And when the smoke cleared, they were still there, still alive, still fighting, still moving east through the fog toward the next unknown shape waiting somewhere ahead.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.